everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Impact Space podcast. I'm here with my brother, Mutanda. How you doing?
I'm good, bro. How are you?
I'm good. Let's get into it. Today is all about diving into a discussion about American soccer culture and what that looks like. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This has been an awesome journey so far, and we appreciate your support. We appreciate the people that have tuned in so far on YouTube and Spotify, and we want to continue to grow this and reach even more people. So please like, share, and subscribe. All right, brother, let's dive in. American soccer culture.
Yeah, it's a big subject. Yeah, you want to narrow it down a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Just if we can start talking about the narrative about identity, that would be a great place. Like, who are we? That would be, I think, a great place to start.
Yeah, and this is all we were talking a little bit about it in offline, but in relation to the performance of the men's national team specifically, 'cause seemingly every time they struggle, if and when they struggle in certain competitions, there's this huge outcry or lots of different takes from lots of different places about not just their level, but the level of the game here, right? And the way that the game unfolds and the systems and all that. So and you and I have identified there's certain patterns or certain things that seemingly critiques that are reoccurring that are somewhat interesting, right?
Hmm.
To
Yeah.
put it to say the least. Um, so the three things that we've identified that we're gonna go over is like there's this idea, that you've heard this, right? And it comes sometimes from former players, which again, nothing. We're not saying that what they're saying has no value, obviously, and or that we know better than them. For example, guys like Tim Howard, Landon Donovan, who have a podcast now, and I watched it after the men's national team lost to Canada, to Panama and Canada. They went off and rightly so for them, they felt as former players, as guys who care about that, they express their opinions, right? And it's like
Hmm.
I find it fascinating to listen to not just them, but also whether it's journalists or even fans who care about the game, and some of the reoccurring messages, and the way those fit in with especially what kids experience at youth level. Really fascinating to me.
Okay. So for you, what would point number one be? I think we're on the same page with where we wanted to start in terms of, that conversation. So in my mind, I was thinking the conversation about trying hard, working hard, playing hard, because that was one of that was one of the ideas, the themes that was brought up, not only just from Landon Donovan and Tim Howard, but from other ex players and pundits as well.
Yeah, so I mean, say more. Like, that is a pattern, 100%. But what it
Just the idea that the players need to work harder, and that there's not enough desire, there's not enough hunger. These are the words that are used. There's not enough bite or grit in the players that show up for the national team. Again, in the context of when the team struggles, when the team specifically doesn't get a certain result, these are the buzzwords that come out. And then going to, oh, the players don't care, right? And so if they don't care, the effort's not there. This is the conversation that is typically taking place in the aftermath of some of these games. And so that's where we need to start and address it, I think.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. I have a whenever I hear that, and you hear this is what's funny about it. You hear it for seemingly every team in all corners of the globe,
Hmm.
club or international team, especially if it's a reputable club or if it's a big nation, right? Um, One of the first things people go to is they play like they don't care, or they look like they don't care, and it's like I often think how much grace that lacks yeah, in terms of giving grace to the players, because it's something I say quite often, and I stand by it. There's so many critiques miss some very fundamental points, right? So as a starting point, I just want to put it out there. How many players do you think, whether it's the men's national team, the women's national team, a top level club team, how many players show up and say, I don't want to play well today. I want to lose today. Or I don't want to, I want to look like, I want to give off the perception that I'm not trying hard. How many players? Right? I mean, I, I think it's a low, my issue with it is it's a low hanging fruit discussion point. And again, this is not to knock the pundits of this world who some of them, many of them maybe have accomplished things in the game that you and I haven't accomplished, but it's not so much about that, what they've accomplished. And actually that's partly the point of like dissecting how easy it is to get in front of a mic and say to about people doing something, oh, they don't care. And it's like I just don't like that as a starting point. And the reason we're having this discussion is this is a common theme. This is a pattern in this country because we live here. Mm-hmm. When the team doesn't do well, oh, they just don't care. Even interestingly enough, on the women's side, who've been very successful, right? Historically, and even now they're winning the Olympics and all that, but like they that's something that's been leveled at them by certain former players of theirs, right? Where it's like, oh, this is a different generation, and they care more about with the women's team. It was more like because obviously these conversations happen slightly differently with the women's team than they do the men's team. But the conversation you remember from some players was like, oh, this current crop cares more about the social media stuff and the social
that the
justice
culture's
stuff.
not right or the culture.
Yeah, and they care less about what we used to care about. And I'm like, that's fascinating. So anyway, my initial response is I don't like that as a talking point. It's kind of a red flag for me. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, but I think if people go back, the game didn't, even for those former players, they came after players as well, right? And the game didn't look the same in the 70s as it did in the 80s, as it did in the 90s, and then into the 2000s, right? Like, and so I think sometimes it can be for everybody. I think it can be tough to give grace, but then know that, well, you were a player at that time following players that had also been critiqued, that had also been under fire at any given moment for either results or the way that they played. And so for me, I think it's tricky, right? To look, like you said, and say, oh, players don't care when each generation has had different challenges that they've had to contend with, right? So whereas, 20, 30 years ago, we can say that even something like, I know that this has come up, loading on the men's side, right? And how much the players are doing physically. That really wasn't a conversation 20, 30 years ago for many reasons, and it's out of the player's control, right? We talk about science, we talk about specifically sports science developing and different ways that teams, clubs are taking care of the athletes' bodies. Well, now we have players that are playing sometimes 2 games a week and traveling, cross-continentally and globally as well. How do we help those players perform at the highest levels while pushing their bodies to limits that honestly, players weren't pushing their bodies to 20, 30 years ago, just on that point alone. So it's really hard, I think you have to address all those things, which can be tough, but you have to address all those things when you look at the current situation. And so it's not about, or I would just simply say, it's about adjusting your lens, right? And that's how I think you can give a more fair critique of what's going on.
No, it's a fair point, and to be clear, it's not like, of course, players of generations past worked hard and played lots of games and struggled and all that. That we know that. At the same time, we do know this is it, and many club coaches at the top level of the game, and even international coaches have talked about, and players constantly are talking about the number of games that they are playing, right? And the load that they're under. And here's the thing: what's interesting is, as fans of the sport, you and I, of course, are not just coaches and former players. We're first and foremost obsessed with it. We're passionate about it, right? It is undoubtedly true that these players are playing so many games with very little rest, right? And it's often not. If you just stop and think about it, and what we know about how long it takes the body to recover from a match, and if you have 3 in 1 week, you're not fit, right? In that, you're constantly at a deficit now when you go into the next game, and then you're still being asked though to go and go and go and go. And I get it. Some people will say, "Oh, but they're compensated really well," and that's, yeah, okay, but that being compensated really well doesn't mean your body hurts any less. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean that now. And here's the other. This is the crucial part, because now we're talking about like critiques in this section, a little bit about critiques of these players in terms of their effort. Being compensated really well doesn't mean that somebody with a microphone isn't going to absolutely hammer you, right? If they perceive that the result that you got at that game is because you didn't put it all in, right? That you didn't give 100%, even though maybe the issue might be more nuanced, which is what we're presenting here. That the issue is always more nuanced than this try hard, and the last thing I would say about this part, and then I turn it over to you, is like the way it relates. You and I discussed like the way this relates to young players, right? And how these discussions don't just happen at the top level, right? And I don't know, can you give an example? Because we talked about this in terms of like a youth level or even lower level pro, right? Or college, whatever, where it's like you get this as a talking point, right? This try hard talking point, and it's problematic.
Yeah, well, because it's almost as if working hard is, maybe in our culture, right, in our soccer culture, it's perceived as something that, though, that's our identity. And I don't think that people really understand that that's not enough, that you can't just work hard. I think that there's more to the game to it. Like if it was just, oh, this is effort alone and effort alone and effort alone, okay, then honestly, I don't know if we would have, I don't know if we'd be able to tell like the levels of quality just around the world, because everybody works hard to a certain degree, right? Like how do you distinguish,
Yeah.
maybe the best team in the world, Argentina, from, somebody else, right? Argentina got beaten in the last World Cup by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia worked hard. Right? I don't know where Saudi Arabia ranks, but if that's not proof about working hard, Saudi Arabia had to work their tails off,
Yeah.
right? And
Everybody
so
has to work. That's why I
everybody
don't.
has
Yeah.
to work,
Right.
which is why it's almost like an old talking point, right? So even if we have to consistently say it, it's almost like, yeah, it's obvious. It's kind of like saying, hey, you're scoring on that goal, you're defending this goal. Yeah, I know that. Let's play, right? So for me, it's not enough to just say, oh, work hard. You have to have a little bit more to your identity and to your story than that. Because if you don't work hard in this game, you're probably not going to go very far as a player or as a team.
Well, here's the piece that's interesting. So about that working hard, let's give the example. I'm gonna give this example of like, as maybe there are folks listening to this who can relate to this, right? And you tell me if I'm out of place here. You're in a training session, and coach sets out an exercise that maybe is unclear or has like a bunch of rules, and people aren't really sure about like what the scoring mechanism is, or about any number of things within the session or within the exercise, right? You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
In that exercise, whatever it is, let's say it's a game. You and I actually can relate to this. I gotta be. You'll remember this. Let's say you're playing an 8v8 game, but then there are bumpers on the outsides, right? All around the outside of this game, and even on the end line, right? So sideline and end line. You can picture this,
Yep.
but then let's say that the coach says, "Oh, you're playing with offsides." Right? Do you notice a problem?
Yeah, there's players off the side of the field
There's
already.
players on the side of the field,
Yeah.
especially there are players on the end line who would be nominally, who are in an offside position and actually even standing out of bounds.
Mm.
So how do you play with offsides in that kind of a game, right? Okay, but now here's the thing, and this has happened. I think we experienced this. We were in a session together. That's why I'm laughing when you remember this.
I do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, now
Months ago.
if I'm on the inside of this game and I pass it to one of those end line players, and then let's say somebody actually it was you and I started to do this. So, but let's say somebody from the other team says offsides, right? Because I played the ball to an end line player. They have a point, right? Because they're like, "Yo, how are we playing with offsides here if he can just pass it there anytime?" And now my point is that you would have players who behave, and we've seen this because in that training session, this literally happened, right? In that training session, that exercise, you would have players who wouldn't necessarily be applying themselves to their 100% max, right? In terms of their exertion, for a very simple reason, because they're unclear about what the heck they're being asked to do and why the rules are the way they are and what this has to do with anything, right? Unless these are players who absolutely have no thought process of their own and are just like, we're going to run through a wall, right? So why do I say that? I say that you can't get 100% application with a lack of clarity, right? So how do we know, whether it's the men's national team, the women's national team, any club team, whatever, that when players are playing, how do we know that what we perceive to be and what we maybe say or what we project to be a lack of effort, how do we know that's just not a lack of clarity in
And
terms of what the team intentions are?
and that comes back to the conversation we had with Noah in episode 4, our
Mm-hmm.
previous episode, where we're talking about results versus process. Right? We only see the final product as the fan, as the people on the outside,
Yep. No,
right,
fair.
viewing the game on TV or in person. We only see the final product. We haven't seen the week of work leading up to that final product. We haven't seen the months of work leading up to that final product, right? And so when we talk about giving grace, unless we're in the locker room, unless we're on the training field, we don't know what the communication is like. We don't know what information is being given or not being given. We don't
Mm-hmm.
know what the structure of the team is supposed to be. We can try to figure it out and dissect it when we watch, but we're not privy to those details, right? And so it makes it that much harder to actually get an accurate understanding of that team
Yeah.
and what they're trying to do,
No.
right?
100%. And this for anyone at watching a youth game on the weekend, it's funny that a lot of the parent feedback and sometimes coaches as well will be around this effort piece, right? You got to run, you got to tackle. And then I often watch players and this is not conjecture, right? This actually happens. You can see it and you can hear it where players will literally be like, "Yeah, but where? Like what run where? What do you want me to like I'm not sure."
Yeah.
And that's proves the point. Like, yo, it's not a question of a lack of desire to do well or to work hard, quote unquote, right? It's more in terms of define that in football terms, coach. Right? What are our team intentions? Where do you want me to run and go tackle? Because here's the thing is when it's super clear, when the situation is clear, hey, this is a 1v1 action that you have to then get to goal. You can see whether a player is applying themselves in terms of their effort to or their I have to be careful here with my language, right? This is the point. But you can see in terms of their reading of things, their anticipation, and then they're picking up on cues, and then the decision that they make. You can kind of see these
Action and
things.
reaction, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's only then with a conversation with the player and knowing the player. You and I spoke about the importance of knowing the player to determine, okay, well, is this player giving their best to the best of their ability? And maybe they are. Maybe that some kids can only run a certain speed.
And that's also where we sometimes don't allow ourselves to say, you know what? Sometimes the other team is better, or that player is a better player, or they're a faster player, right?
Yeah.
And so if we don't know our players' strengths, right, or what they struggle with, then yeah, your analysis can simply just boil down to, oh, you're not working hard enough. Well, no, coach, that kid is far more physically developed than I am. I haven't hit puberty yet.
Right, right, right.
I haven't hit my growth spurt yet. That kid is literally 6 feet tall, and I'm standing 4 foot nothing. I'm sorry I can't catch him, right? Like
No,
I don't.
context. Yeah.
There's got to be context, right? And
Context.
so
Yeah.
we talk about these things all the time, but it boils down to, do you know the players and the team that you're working with?
So that's a great transition to sort of the next thing of our three things that are commonly talked about in U.S. soccer circles, which is, so one, we have this try hard thing, which is, I think we can wrap a bow on it by saying, look, everybody has to try hard, but let's try to move away from that as the talking point. Not that it doesn't matter, but like that's the low hanging fruit. We can be more nuanced. We can be more, I think, maybe savvy, intelligent about it. The next piece, which is, you talked about knowing players and the importance of the role, the coach knowing the players. There's this idea, and we just have to call it what it is. We have to say it, right? There's this idea that one individual who hails from Catalonia is responsible for the downfall of this sport, right? Which we could, that's a whole nother episode potentially, but I find that hilarious for a number of reasons. But the reason that comes up in U.S. soccer circles is, especially if we reference like that Landon Donovan, Tim Howard podcast, which folks should check out, by the way. And I also have to say, I have all the respect in the world for those two, like both in terms of players. I don't know if I told you, Landon's my favorite U.S. player on the men's side. I think he was top for me. Mm-hmm. I put him above Clint and Pulisic, actually, both of them. I put him above as a player. I think Pulisic is obviously, where he's playing is different, and he can still do some amazing things. But if you look at the trajectory of like what they did and how they played, I just think Landon had something else. But in their podcast, they both talked about, Pep Guardiola's ruined football. And the way they linked that to the U.S. team was because everybody's trying to copy him, and we don't have those players, right? We don't work, and we don't have the players who are that world class, and so that style or this won't work. So people need to move away from this idea. So your thoughts on that? And have you heard this critique of essentially copying and pasting from other places, especially Pep?
Yeah, no, I've heard it. It gives that person way too much power, in my opinion, and just way too much credit as well for the coaches that study their craft year after year, that have worked with players at various levels, that have moved their families around, that have invested time, like I said, in their own education, and have taken risks with their career to take certain jobs. It's that's just not a fair critique and analysis. I can imagine, right, to quick segue to England. I can imagine there were coaches before Pep arrived in England, right? 2016 is when Pep arrived in England. There were coaches that wanted to play possession in England before Pep was there, right? There were coaches that wanted to instill that kind of style in their teams. But we still go back to this idea of what is our identity, right? And people saying, oh, no, you can't play that style in England. We're this hard-nosed, hard tackling, run, pump the ball forward, get into the channels, win second balls, duels. And people said to Pep, oh, you're not going to be able to do that here. But here's the funny thing is, that's his vision of the game. It doesn't have to be your vision of the game, right? And so this is where it's interesting. And you say to players, "Oh, you can't play that style. You can't. You can't play in that way, right? You don't have to be a Man City player, a Barcelona player to play a possession style." And your coach, you don't
Facts.
have to play that way, period. If the coach
Facts.
doesn't want that for
Right.
you guys, no one's holding no one's holding you hostage. I'll just say that in the most appropriate way I can. No one's holding you hostage to saying you have to play possession. You have to play short passes out of the back. I don't know where that idea came from. That all of a sudden we have to adopt that idea and it has to be ours.
Well, some people would I know that some would disagree with that in terms of what they would say is that there are coaches who are forcing players to do that, right? And forcing the American player to do that on the international stage when, in sort of in lieu of, and then essentially the narrative is, well, because people are trying so hard to copy a Man City or a Barca or whatever, that something is lost about the American identity in terms of the grit, the desire, the graft. That's what I obviously don't agree with that on many levels, but this is the idea.
Oh man, this is interesting because the other thing I want to point out, if we go back to that semifinal, U.S. Panama, okay, for the people that understand, okay, here's our way of playing, but there's a difference between our game model, our principles, and the game plan,
Say more.
right? So our principles don't change, okay? Our game model may not change, but what can change is the game plan. If people remember, Panama sat deep. The U.S. had the ball, right?
For large periods, yeah.
So we had a game to play that was very different than the game Panama was playing. They set out to sit in a low block. They set out to frustrate us and keep us in front of them. Okay? So naturally, they allowed us to have the ball. Now, what we did with the ball, we can say it wasn't clean enough. It wasn't clinical enough. We didn't maybe generate enough chances, right? We didn't threaten them enough. And what I would say is that we don't understand sometimes that a team's principles are different than the game plan. And in that game, we needed to attack. We needed players to be creative. We needed players to go 1v1. Right?
When you say we, by the way, you're talking about the U.S. team.
The U.S. team,
Okay.
yes, the
All right.
U.S. team.
Yeah.
Yeah, we needed players to maybe unlock, the defense by, again, that 1v1 initiative, taking players on, being brave, maybe crossing the ball into the box a bit more, getting runners into the box a bit more. We didn't have that. And so sometimes I think there's a difference, and people need to understand the difference between, yes, our style and our game model, our philosophy, but also what it takes to win a game. The game would have been very different if Panama pressed high. Then the solutions would have been a bit different. And sometimes people don't have an appreciation for that.
Yeah, there's also it also harkens back to what's very frustrating slash cruel about this sport, which is that you can be the team that has the better players, which I think the U.S. has compared to Panama. You can be the team that has the greater share of the ball, which they did, and plays, and even has the more you could say the better territory in terms of where the game's being played on the pitch, right?
Yeah.
All that can be true, and yet if you don't take your chances, you leave the door open to be countered, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
Or they
did have
were
chances. The U.S. team did have chances.
they had
Yeah.
chances. Now this is we've watched that game, especially watching the teams that you and I enjoy watching, right, at club level and even internationally. We've watched this story unfold all the time. It happens all the time, right? Even funny enough, with the aforementioned Pep Guardiola, right, who's apparently ruined football. Like his teams have constantly been beat that way, right, by teams who are like, no, we're just gonna sit deep. We're gonna allow you the ball and be in certain areas anyway, and then we're gonna wait. And when we get a chance, we're gonna try to punish you. Okay, that's football. I love what you said though about the difference between our way of playing and then the implementation. So essentially, our principles, and then the implementation of those principles within a certain a game, against an opponent that's challenging us, so that we have to find a different solution. And this is what I wanted to say about this idea of copying other people, right? Or especially this idea that maybe, certain coaches have ruined the game because everybody here is trying to copy. We started this by giving players grace for this try hard myth, right? People care about playing well, right? Kids, adults, they all care. With this one, we got to give the coaches grace, like you were saying, and I appreciate the what you said too about the journeys that coaches go on, and not enough is made about that, right? So even Pep, people act like this person is frozen and his ideas are frozen in time, when he has been on a journey throughout his coaching career, and his teams don't play. Even this current team has been at with City for what, 8 years now, 9, going on even 9 years. The team doesn't play the same way that they did when he first got there, or it doesn't play the same. This 2024 team doesn't play like the 2017 team. Why? Different players, right? And a different challenges that they face, and he's evolved. Now, my point in saying that is, it's a question. It's not so much a question of imitation. It's a question of implementation, right? And everybody around the world is trying to solve the same things. Like, that's what we have to humble ourselves a little bit. That's why I laugh a little bit when people lose their minds because the men's national team or whatever loses some games, right? That you can explain in football terms. Mm-hmm. And it's like, hang on, folks. It's process. I get it. Winning in this culture especially matters a lot, and it's results-based business at the top level. I get it. I'm not naive. At the same time, let's also look, and we can explain the loss to Panama and even Canada in football terms. We can do that, right? We can do that without having to resort to, oh, the players don't try hard, and the game's gone here in the U.S. because everybody's trying to play like Pep. Everybody's trying to copy Pep, right? Because here's the thing. If I know a bunch of coaches who coach, young kids, I promise you these individuals know that their players are not Manchester City players, right? I promise you that these people know that they are not coaching first teamers who make millions of dollars. They know. But what they're challenged with, what they're faced with is, how do I implement a cohesive way of playing with these kids? And it may be in lieu of knowledge, right? Or an understanding of how to do that. What do people do? They look sometimes to the pro game, and they look to see what other people are doing, right? They know full well they don't have those players, but they try to implement because they're attracted to a certain aesthetic. Okay. But it's not so much necessarily because it's like, oh, I want to copy them. I want to be like them. It's because people are trying to make sense of this game and trying to create a model for themselves. So rather than go down this road of, oh, we can't be like Pep because we don't have his players, it's, how do we get people better at implementing, to your point, an identity, a style that does work for our players, right? Because there are a lot of talented players here who absolutely can play a possession style, right? Absolutely. We're doing a disservice to American players all around this country if we say we have no hope of being like Spain or anybody else like that. We don't have to be like Spain. So anyway,
And on that point, you and I have talked several times about the fact that winning on the world stage is very difficult.
yes, thank you, amen. Yeah,
Winning on the world stage is very difficult.
objectively so.
Objectively, yeah, because
It's not
how many, we
subjective.
talked about this the other day. How many teams have won the World Cup?
On the men's side. So let's isolate, because this is the point
On the
is
men's side, sorry, yes, yes.
eight on the men's side.
8.
Yeah,
Okay, and the point is that 6 of them have won it multiple times. Two of
six
them
of
have,
yep.
and only 2 have won it once. The 2 that have won it once are England and Spain.
Both phenomenal footballing cultures.
Right, with arguably the 2 best leagues in the world, attracting the best talent in the world.
Both give a damn about it. So then, yeah, exactly. So are we supposed to say? Are we supposed to think that their national teams haven't been trying hard to win?
Right, and so sometimes, and this is maybe a part of our culture, soccer culture, but it's a part of our national identity. Winning just comes first. Win, 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 win. And sometimes we don't care how it looks. And at the end of the day, when we're talking about youth development, is winning really the priority? That's what we have
It's a
to ask
piece of
ourselves.
it. It's a
It's a
piece of
piece
it.
of it.
Agents, it's important. It's an
It's
important puzzle piece. Yes, but
it is. It
we
is.
have to play this in context.
But we have to put it in context, and we have to understand that all these other countries have their own way of doing things. They
Mhm.
have their own way of doing things. It takes time to implement a system. It takes time to build something, right? And when we look at our country, and I know the women's leagues have had a similar trajectory as the men's leagues in terms of this kind of turbulent, okay, the leagues are there, they're not, they're there, they're not, right? Defunct teams and all that. Some of these countries, on the men's side specifically, have had leagues around for over 100 years. The U.S., on the men's side, I know for sure, only established a clear first division league in what, 96?
The MLS has been around since '96. Yep.
Right? And so everyone is trying. It takes time to build something, and it's okay to struggle. Right? There's this idea sometimes that struggling is maybe in our culture we just say it's weakness. But you look at these other countries, they've struggled. And there have been years where they didn't qualify for tournaments, maybe. There were years where teams didn't win trophies, or they got close and maybe said, oh, we got to keep going. We got to keep trying. Right? I think sometimes we're a little bit impatient in this country in terms of looking at results and saying, we're a success or we're a failure, and we want to brand ourselves right away instead of looking at, can we develop and adopt a bigger approach, a bigger lens, a bigger vision for where we can take the game instead of just focusing on the short-term results, you know?
No, it's a great point. I would add that, of course, a lot of money has been spent to try to improve and
Mm-hmm.
to and our by saying MLS has been around since '96. You and I are not saying that MLS is perfect or even like necessarily a. I gotta be careful here a little bit, but like it's not to say that MLS needs to exist for this country to be better, because there are valid critiques about the closed system and the way the game operates on a first division level, right? And the fact that there's no alignment. The ProRel is part of that, but really it's the idea in terms of who owns the game, the opportunities for grassroots and community based, which is the essence of this sport. Grassroots and community based clubs to one day become players at the pro level, right? At whatever level, and then merit their, earn their way to a top level. And that has a knock on effect in terms of what the way the game unfolds for young people. These are the systemic challenges that are here. And it's valid to bring that up. And there's many wonderful people who have detailed these things. And it's a conversation that's happening even more, right? We've seen USL come out with their pro-rel ideas. And there's debate around whether that's even sufficient because, again, it's still a closed system. But again, that's somewhat a subject for another time. And the point here is just to say this is our conversation here needs to extend to things like that in terms of how do we improve the structures so that the players are coming up with different incentives and so that the game is more accessible to people who to more people to have skin in the game with an actual opportunity to achieve a high level of play. And the more we can do that, the more opportunities, obviously the stiffer the competition within internally, and then therefore the greater the pool of players for national teams, right? On the men and the women's side. This is the point. And I think that's a better conversation than, oh, see, the players don't work hard and everybody's trying to copy a European model. When it's like, oh, everybody around the world is struggling trying to figure it out. No, this is the secret, right? Or this is an unspoken truth, or a truth that's not often spoken. Everybody's struggling and everybody's trying to figure it out. And I know that this nation is obsessed with winning. I get it. But you know what? Other nations are obsessed with winning too. Go look at Brazil and see the reactions when the Brazilian team doesn't do well. And what do you hear? The players don't care about the shirt, right? These players suck. Ronaldinho can't watch anymore. Ah, we miss Neymar. Everybody's flipping out. And okay, I get it, rightly so, because their standard, they're used to winning. But here's the thing is then you do take a deep dive into the Brazilian men's national team. The last time they won was in 2002, the World Cup. And after that they had some decent teams, a couple of the World Cups, but it's been a disappointment for a long time. Right? We already mentioned Spain. With their soccer history and with the love that they have of the game, the men have won one World Cup. England, I love to smash England to pieces in terms of their contribution because again, the arrogance is astounding from a nation that won once in 1966 when I don't even know how many nations were playing on a serious level and how many nations were in that tournament. Right? I mean, it's a much smaller. It's a different event all entirely, right? And I'm pretty sure they won on a dubious goal as well, right? Was the ball over the line? Was it not? But they won it, 1966. Congrats. Haven't won anything since. So now, when we talk about the U.S., the reason I bring that stuff up is for people to use the success at a World Cup as the barometer for how the game unfolds here is a little bit like. Really? It's a little disingenuous, right? Because you look deeper and you're like, oh, the team isn't, it's obviously not one of the world's elite nations, right? On the men's side, but it's not terrible. And sometimes the conversation is, oh, the men are terrible. No, they're not. Relax yourself. Stop being so insecure about, we got to win because we're the U.S. I don't. All right. Now, on the women's side, before I turn it over to you, what's interesting is the conversation's somewhat different. But even there's a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of mythology, and there's a lot of there's a false sense of security in a way for a long time because the U.S. team was winning, and let's be real, and I'm not even gonna be PC about this. The U.S. women's team historically has won. In part because, yes, they were brilliant and they were doing what they had to do, beating who was in front of them, but also because there were a lot of other nations who were not putting forth the resources to care about their women's programs. And not saying the U.S. was perfect at that, because God knows the women even now are struggling with a lot of things, and there's things that they fight with, and rightfully so. I support them in that stance. But compared to other nations without those resources that the U.S. has, what chance do they have when they don't even have
Established leagues
established leagues or anything?
Yeah.
People not caring. Now that you can see people are putting money into it, look at what Spain is doing on the women's side.
And look at what Japan is doing. Look at what
Japan is doing. What they have been doing.
France is doing. Yeah.
And so now the U.S. women are no longer the unquestioned top dogs on the women's side. They're there, of course. Just won the Olympics. Some really good players. Mm-hmm. Even though you and I both know, and we're clued into this, maybe more than most. But like, I talked to several people who are involved at a high level on the national team, and it's like there are a lot of players who are athletically very gifted on the girls' side and the youth national teams and on the women's side. And what's happening is the rest of the world is catching up in terms of just the pure football. And the U.S. women being bigger, stronger, faster isn't working anymore like it used to, right? Not in the same way. You see what I mean? And this is something that the nation has to contend with, because that's kind of a transition segue for us to the third thing, myth or idea that we have to dissect and get over, which is this concept of our best athletes don't play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the fascinating thing is, unfortunately, and I say this very deliberately, unlike other countries, soccer in this country, football, has to contend with other sports, with American baseball, with American football, with basketball. And so what that means is that our lens on athleticism in this country is very particular.
Yep.
Whereas in other countries, they can appreciate athleticism being a variety of other things because of the lens of how important the game is to their culture and to their history, right? Soccer, football, right? The world's game, football, has not been the main sport in this country as it has been in other countries. And so when we talk about athletes, people are typically talking about your football players, your basketball players, your 6'5", 6'6", 200-pound guys, can run the 40 in 4.3 seconds. These are the guys that we're talking about as being athletes, when really the game has shown us that athleticism comes in different shapes and sizes. And this is the reason why a player, maybe the best example we can think of in the modern day and age, a player like Messi can be successful at 5'7", 160 pounds, right? He doesn't have to be taller. He doesn't have to be bigger, right? He can still play the game and be very, 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 very good, despite what many may seem to believe is a disadvantage in terms of his size and his build.
Yeah, this is a fascinating discussion, and that's why it takes it's nuance. And sometimes I'll be honest, I've fought with people on this point because I was so frustrated that they seemingly, in my opinion, didn't get it. And then I realized that I'm like I need to calm down, because at the end of the day, like you say, it's about the lens. The reason I'm saying I need to calm down. It's so clear, and like that. You put it brilliantly. The American paradigm of what constitutes a great athlete is skewed as it relates to this sport, right? Because objectively, the sport clearly shows you, right, that you can have a range of profiles that can be successful at the exercise of playing football. Like, you can't argue that. That's just not. It's not a debate. That's what. It's just really simple. As simply as I can put it. You can be tall and lanky and be successful. Yeah, there are those players. You can be shorter, stockier build and be successful. You see what I mean? And then anything in between. Like, you can do that. So what does that prove? It proves that yes, it affords a wider range of physical makeup players that can be successful. And this is why. But when we talk about bigger, stronger, faster, I think two things are happening. Two very important things. One, some people, yes, like you put it, are using the lens of these popular American sports, like American football, right? Where, yes, it is a collision sport and you have to be super fast and super strong to be able to get the ball over the end line, right? To be able to evade this and withstand those hits. The game requires that. I get that. And so then what people say is, oh, yeah, some people, not everybody, what people say is, oh, I'm just going to transform, or we're going to take those bodies and put them on the soccer field, and no one's going to stop us. We'll dominate because now these people are going to be, and it's like, you're missing some very important points, right, about what football requires, right? But now there's a more, that I think that's easy to debunk. So we're not going to spend more time on that. There is another train of thought, though, that I think bears more reflection and is a nuanced conversation and is important. And I've had this one as well, which is this, that because of the way the game is structured here, there are entire communities that do not have access to the game at a higher level of play in any serious way. And what that means is the players, right? And we can be blunt, we can be specific, especially in, like, let's say, black communities, inner city communities, and even Latino communities who are like soccer first families, football first families that love the game. Because of a lack of access to the sport, you're potentially cutting off tons of potential brilliant footballers from accessing the game, which would change your player pool and which might give you a different physical makeup of player, right? And here's the thing, I'm in line to agree with that argument. I think that's a valid argument. That's a valid critique. And yet here's the point as it relates to what most people think of in terms of bigger, stronger, faster. Let's say, Mumbi, that we had this soccer revolution, right? That and everything we want to see happens, right? We have a more open system. There's pro rel, and now the game at a youth level doesn't cost families, an entire mortgage in terms of putting their kids in a quality environment, right? That they can afford the game and they can have access to quality coaching. All these things happen from a young age, right? You would still, in terms of the top end players, the elite players, you would still get a wide range of physical profiles who play, because some of the best players, if we're doing our job properly, some of the best players would still be maybe players who are smaller in stature and height and weight, if we just use those as metrics for this athleticism, because this is what's commonly used. That's what we're going to go off of. We would see players who wouldn't be picked for an NBA team, right? We would still see players who wouldn't make an NFL, who wouldn't do well at an NFL combine.
And that's okay.
And it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly valid. There's still quality. But here's the thing: what people who put forward that argument of, oh, our best athletes don't play, again, they would push back, and they wouldn't be able to see, because their paradigm is so stuck on this, that they would somehow have a confirmation bias about this. And I've seen it happen. It happens with people all the time. You point out, for example, France. France has incredible athletes, and these are black. And some of this is really just a conversation about blackness too. Like, let's be real. People see black bodies and they think, oh, physical prowess, and we need more of these at soccer levels. And here's the thing: we have to be careful about this. Of course, I want to see more black people playing football. but we have to. The point we're making is, we've got to sort of get rid of this obsession with this physical prowess idea, and put this in its proper place. Because as much as France has amazing athletes, you can say that. Yeah, they're amazing footballers. They're intelligent footballers.
Amazing
and let's be
brains, yeah.
And let's be real. This is the point about what it would look like here. If our national team, especially on the men's side and even on the women's side, if it looked more like France, we would still have players who would be deemed by some as not being amazing superstar athletes. For example, to put an actual person to it, N'Golo Kante. N'Golo Kante is what, 5'6"? How much does he weigh? He's not making the Golden State Warriors. He's not making a high school basketball team. So what the heck are we talking about in terms of, oh, our best athletes don't play? It's more nuanced than that. And it doesn't. This reason it frustrates me is also it does a disservice to how good the actual athletes are who are playing the game now. And historically, even on the men's side, this athleticism thing has never been an issue, really. Because think about the conversation we started with. We started with a conversation about how the men's national team, people want to see more grit. They want to see more desire. They want to see people running through there. And they're criticizing these players now who are playing at top-level clubs, right? And they're saying, yeah, we need you to tackle. Are you really trying to tell me that Yunus Musa is not an incredible athlete? Weston McKennie? Right? Or even if we go back to previous generations, that 2010 team had absolute monsters. Have you seen Josie Altidore in person? Josie Altidore 100% could play in the NFL if that was his chosen path. The man is massive. And people who've seen him in person or watched him, he's massive. Michael Bradley's not a small person. Oguchi Onyewu, who played on that 2010 team, 6'4". I don't know how much he weighed, like 6'3", 6'4". Gucci Onyewu got into a fight with Zlatan Ibrahimovic at AC Milan. And reading between the lines, he did really well in that fight. You get what I'm saying? It's a like we said with the try hard, it's a low-hanging fruit talking point that people need to be more nuanced with how they discuss it. Otherwise, what they're showing is just their lack of understanding of how the sport functions. Point blank, period. Sorry, I went off because it gets me so mad. But
it's an important conversation, though. It's an important conversation. It needs to be said. because that's an issue that I don't see, and maybe you can share as well what you see. We don't really see other countries struggling with that issue per se. Because when you look at their national teams, it's clear that you do have a range of profiles, right? The holding mid may not look like the center forward, and that's okay. The center back may not look like the winger. Take the example of two players for Portugal and for Man City. When Bernardo Silva stands next to Ruben Diaz, some people might laugh. Like, they play on the same team, right? We talk about the athleticism argument. Ruben Diaz is this built, stocky, about 6'2" guy, right? Really built, strong guy. And then you have Bernardo Silva standing next to him, about 5'6", 5'7", like 150 pounds or so, skinny, stick. And they play in the same teams at club and national team level, different roles, different profiles, working towards the same goal.
How is that possible if it's just bigger, stronger, faster that succeeds?
Well, but that requires a different lens, and this is what people
There you
need
go.
to understand, and they
There you
need to potentially evaluate themselves honestly and say, my lens might need some changing. If you just take an example, I know that we had started talking about Pep and we don't need to copy and take things from other places. What's our idea? What's our identity? Okay, well, we need to also take a look and say, all right, well, what is it that I'm trying to do? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish in my team, in my club, with our national teams, right? And say, hey, there's actually some things that we're missing here. There's some things that we're missing. And so for me, that athleticism argument is it's an interesting one. And as soon as we can start to move away from that a little bit, then I think it opens the door for so many more possibilities and for other players, other profiles, other types of players to come up through the system.
Absolutely.
It really does. Because that's a conversation, right? We say, oh, where are our holding mids? Where are our Xavis? Where are our Iniestas? Where are our, Busquetses?
I love that you say that because here's the thing. I put it there. Do you remember? And we're almost wrapping up here, but I gotta say this. Like, you remember? Maybe it was a couple years ago. Certainly when Pedri and Gavi were first coming up for the first team. I put out a tweet at one point because I watched him play. Maybe it was for Spain or whatever. But and because again, this conversation, bigger, stronger, faster, athleticism rears its head a lot. And that's why we're discussing it tonight. But I put out a tweet that said something to the effect of Pedri. If we just look at Pedri, right? Both of them. I think I mentioned both of them because Gavi's smaller. He's a little bit shorter than Pedri.
He's a little shorter.
Yeah.
But
I said
he's a little bit thicker.
They would both. They would struggle. And other players, there's precedence for this. But follow me what I'm saying here. They would struggle to make it to top level in this country. And not necessarily because they wouldn't be good enough, right? Because clearly they can play and they can whatever. It's not that they wouldn't be good enough. It's that, and I said they would struggle because unless they were in a certain environment, they would find it hard to be in an environment where the entire ethos of that environment, right? The way that the coaches and everybody thought about the game, the developmental practices, the way that their teams trained, the way that their teams played, they would struggle to find an environment that was wrapped around their strengths as players so that the very best qualities would come to fruition and shine. And we see this because it happens with a lot of players where it's like they have these qualities, but those qualities aren't allowed to flourish. Why? In part because the people in charge of those clubs, whether they're their directors or they're the coaches of those teams, don't actually see the qualities that these young kids have. When they're young and they're not obviously physically developed yet, but you can still see something, but these coaches may not see it. Why? Because of that lens. And because the team, when they go play on the weekend, is all about, no, we just got to get to goal quickly. Kick it forward. I don't want you guys, don't mess around with it at the back. You're telling 10,
and
11
it's all
year olds
about winning.
and it's winning. Then what happens to that Pedri or Gavi, who's maybe a middle fielder, interior player who wants to get on it, right? Now they're just being bypassed, right? So now, in terms of the struggles that they need to face to develop their qualities, it ain't happening.
No, no.
And then people will justify it and saying, yeah, but my big, fast, strong kid up front is scoring all these goals. Okay, maybe. But this Pedri and Gavi, who could be brilliant, are not being developed. And so that's why they might struggle here. Not to say there aren't quality coaches who understand this, because there are, and that's why we're having the discussion, right? There are many people. We got to give some people grace. And in order to do that, we have to move away from this myth of like, oh, see, our athletes aren't playing. No, they are. Weston is an incredible athlete. If you don't see that, that's on you. Timothy Weah is an incredible athlete. Right?
Robinson, incredible athlete.
Anthony Robinson. I know Anthony, and Anthony was, he's from up there, like he grew up there, whatever. But like, yes, stop with the BS takes. let's grow in our analysis of here. So, anyway, what would you add, man? This is it's been a powerful hour here. Like, what would you add to this, or what would you challenge the people with, or leave the people with?
Open your mind. That's what I would challenge everybody with. I think the more you can have these kinds of conversations and listen to these kinds of conversations and put yourselves in situations where you might be uncomfortable, that's the best thing for the game in this country. It's the best thing for your ecosystem, your club where you work, or your team where you work. Be uncomfortable, just like the players are going to be uncomfortable when they play, right? So we as coaches have to develop and evolve, just as we're asking the players to do, for whatever reason, whether it's just for development purposes or whether it's for getting results purposes. We have to be a little bit more uncomfortable and challenge some of our pre-existing notions about the way the game is played and the way we see the game, because then I think that's when we truly start to move towards creating excellent footballing environments in this country.
Brilliant. Well said, man. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Look out for more stuff. I think Mumbi and I, we're working on some really cool projects for the young players, especially some shorter shows, like 10, 15-minute snippets where we just dissect one aspect that you can use to improve your game, or to, whether it's the preparation for games, within games, recovery, the way your, life after football, whatever it is. There's a lot of things that we want to present, and a lot more in terms of some awesome guests that we have lined up. So thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Mumbi, thank you for your time as always. We'll see you next time on the Impact Space podcast.